Trump has been in office for about a month now, and he's already energized half the country and pissed off the other half. Love him or hate him, he has produced the most consequential first month of presidency we've ever had. Is that good or bad? Initially, I thought he had got off to a good start, but no longer. In this video, I'll tell you why. Hello out there. I am trying to get through.
With cold, blunt analysis cradled in the warmth of reasoning, it's time for Johnny Walker Dread to straighten you out on a thing or two. Emanating all the way from exciting Las Vegas, Oklahoma, it's time for the Johnny Walker Dread Show.
It appears more and more that Elon Musk is doing all the heavy lifting in Trump's zeal to shrink government spending. Not to say that I disagree with all of his actions. Let's face it, the federal government is pretty wasteful. I have long chuckled at some of the grant notifications pushed out by U.S. aid. I'm not on board with saying that all of them were bad, but it's pretty clear that U.S. aid got pretty comfortable sponsoring projects that would make most rational people go, wait, what? But I'm tired of Elon's act. Here he is, coked out of his mind, waving a chainsaw to symbolize all the wasteful spending. And who gave him the chainsaw? The president of Argentina. Why would he care? One area where Elon is cutting is the indirect cost rate attached to grants, and he's going too far. Essentially, Elon has told the NIH that it needs to cap all indirect costs at 15%. But most people don't know what that means. I do, and so I'm going to explain it. Now, I'm going to oversimplify a bit. When you request money from the feds, you have to itemize your budget according to about a half a dozen categories. Typically, the three largest categories are salaries, equipment, and program activities. Let's assume that the grant budget's $100,000 to each category. This combines to $300,000, which is called a direct cost of the grant. Add the indirect cost to this amount, and you get the total grant amount that the feds are going to give the university. What is an indirect cost? Well, we'll get to that in a moment. Let's talk about these three categories. Unlike what many people think, grant funding for salaries only covers the summer months of the professor, usually 2 months. It's a modest supplement. If a professor makes $120,000 a year, which is $10,000 per month, that means the professor can only add $20,000 to his overall salary from the grant. And if he or she does, they can't take time off during this time. They have to run the grant program. Now, I've seen some professors cheat on this and do far less work than they should, but they're not making out like bandits like everyone thinks. Included in this category is money for postdoc researchers and graduate research assistants, and they also have limitations on how much they can earn. Equipment typically refers to anything with a long life and costs over $5,000, although some universities change that to a different amount. And program activities refer to that which we are going to do as part of the program, such as training if it's a training grant, and so on. Now, indirect cost rates for a typical university hover around 50%, at least at the ones that I've worked with. But that doesn't mean 50% of the entire grant award. Usually, universities choose to omit one of the three categories from the calculation. Each university decides which categories it wants to include. How do they settle on the indirect cost rate? The calculation for that rate is complicated. Usually, you have to negotiate with a federal agency who will request a ton of information from you. Where you're located, typical staff salaries, insurance rates, utility expenditures, and so on. For example, it probably costs Stanford a lot more to run its programs than New Mexico State. Stanford has massive research programs that chew up tons of money in insurance and utilities. If you want to faint, check out the electricity bill of a major physics laboratory, especially those that cool materials down to like near 0 Kelvin. Oh, and by the way, you can cool some materials down to negative Kelvin. No charge for that tidbit. What does the indirect cost do? It pays for the overhead costs to run the program. Essentially, it makes the research program worth it to the university. Without it, every grant project costs more to support than it gets from the feds because you need staffing, electricity, insurance, and all that. Also, the indirect cost can be used as a sort of rainy day fund for when a grant program has become more costly than anticipated, like with inflation. Universities would rather prefer to assign the indirect cost rate to the entirety of the direct cost, so as to give it maximum indirect monies. Researchers want to restrict it to one if possible. Why? You can only ask for a maximum amount of money. So the more indirect cost that is given to the university, the less researchers can claim for their programs. So there is a lot of negotiation. The result is that indirect costs are usually not applied to the entirety of all direct costs. Let's assume that the university has decided to omit salaries from the indirect cost rate. The other two categories in our example combine to $200,000, so that a 50% indirect cost would amount to $100,000. Therefore, the total grant request would amount to $400,000. Now, Elon has forced federal agencies to restrict the amount to 15%, but of the total grant award. This is a rather strange logical construction, but I'll assume that he meant 15% of the total direct costs. This means that the university will only collect $45,000 in indirect costs, not $100,000. So the feds have saved the taxpayers $55,000. This sounds great, but now all of a sudden the grant award looks less desirable than before. And it could be that in some cases, the overhead costs of a research program could become more than they're getting from the feds. Remember, indirect cost rates are negotiated taking into account numerous factors. Elon is just wiping all that out and using 15% for everyone. Some of your bigger research universities are going to be in trouble. I cannot overemphasize the impact that forcing all indirect costs to the same 50% will have on research. In my opinion, this type of thinking is for dullards. Why 15%? And why the same for everyone? What can the feds do? Well, they can push some of the expenditures that would normally go into an indirect cost into the direct cost. Instead of assuming that electricity will be covered by indirect costs, just have researchers place the cost of electricity into the, say, equipment category. But that would require new policies that Elon and Trump would be quick to try and thwart. The bigger picture is Elon and Trump's view that if a researcher is funded by the feds, that makes the researcher one of those evil government leeches. And what do we do with leeches? We stamp them out. The NIH, it's a federal agency. Destroy it. Oh, it does a lot of cancer research? Well, it also does other kinds of research that I don't like. So let's get rid of all of it. So yeah, I can't go along with this. To me, Elon's approach to these cost cuttings is just dumb. Like my video and subscribe to my channel.